So Simple tutorial. Good morning students. Welcome to SST So Simple tutorial. In the previous class we had read the rise of Chinese economy. That means how China became an economic power. Today we will discuss the next topic, India-China relations. Before we enter into this topic, let us learn some basic concepts. This will help you grasp the topic quickly. Look at this map. You can see India, Nepal, Tibet, Bhutan and China. See the location of Tibet. This is the map that existed before China occupied Tibet. So China was not immediate neighbor of India, rather Tibet acted as a buffer zone between India and China. But it is not so in present times. Look at this map. China occupied Tibet in 1959 and since then the border has become a contentious issue between India and China. China and India today share a border with Nepal and Bhutan acting as buffer states. Now see how many Indian states share border with China. The states of Arunachal Pradesh, then Sikkim, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh and the Union Territory of Ladakh. Thus India shares a very long, about 3,488 kilometers of border with China that runs along these states. Now let us see the boundary line between India and China. The boundary line between India and China in the eastern sector is called McMahon Line. This line specifically represents the boundary between Arunachal Pradesh and Tibet from Bhutan in the west to Myanmar in the east. This line was drawn way back in 1914. Actually, to have a clear boundary between Tibet and India, the government of Tibet and the government of British India had agreed on this line in 1914. This agreement was called Simla Accord of 1914. But what is the present position? China disputes its legal status. China does not accept this agreement and therefore does not recognize this McMahon Line. India recognizes the McMahon Line and considers it to be the line of actual control LAC between India and China. Now there is another term called LAC, line of actual control. Don't mix this term with LOC, that is line of control, which is used in the Indo-Pak context. In the context of Indo-China border dispute, LAC is a notional demarcation line that separates India-controlled territory from Chinese-controlled territory. That means, to be very precise, it is the line up to which each side exercises actual control. Let us see the LAC and the dispute created by China. The LAC is generally divided into three sectors. First, the western sector. This lies between Ladakh on the Indian side and Xinjiang autonomous regions on the Chinese side. Second, the central sector. This lies between Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh on the Indian side and the Tibet autonomous region on the Chinese side. Third, the eastern sector. This lies between Arunachal Pradesh on the Indian side and the Tibet autonomous region on the Chinese side. Okay. Now look at the Aksai Chin in red color. China considers this region as a part of its Xinjiang province. After the ceasefire of 1962 war, China withdrew its forces back to LAC as it existed in 1959 but did not vacate Aksai Chin. Since then, Aksai Chin is held with China. Now in eastern sector, the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh is claimed by China as a part of its Tibet province. The Chinese government refers to this state as South Tibet. Understood? In the central sector also, China claims some regions of Lahaul and Spiti districts and Shipkila region of Kinnaur district of Himachal Pradesh. Similarly, some regions in Uttarkashi as well as Chamoli district of Uttarakhand are also claimed by China as part of Tibet province. So actually there is not one but two disputes. One is border dispute and two, China claiming Aksai Chin and Arunachal is a territorial dispute. I hope you have got a rough idea about McMahon Line, LAC, Aksai Chin, etc. So now let us start our lesson. My dear students, China and India are two powerful countries in Asia. They are the two most populous countries and amongst the fastest developing economies in the world. The relationship between India and China is usually termed as Sino-Indian relations or Indian-Chinese relations, which means the bilateral relationship between India and China. People's Republic of China (PRC), dear students, as you know, was established by Mao in 1949. India lost no time to extend official recognition to the PRC and established diplomatic relations on 1st April 1950. Thereafter, an agreement was signed which recognized the five principles of Panchsheel for peaceful existence, and hereafter the slogan Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai became very popular. When the two new republics that came into existence in the mid of 20th century, there was a hope that they would come together to shape the future of developing world and particularly Asia. But that was not to happen. The communist rulers of China, dear students, had their eyes on Tibet from the very beginning. In 1958, there was an armed uprising in Tibet against China's occupation. In 1959, troops of Chinese army captured Lhasa in March 1959 and dissolved the government headed by Dalai Lama. The PRC government closed the monasteries in Tibet and imposed Chinese laws and custom in the region. In the same year, Dalai Lama, the spiritual head of Tibetan people, sought sanctuary in India. Indian government granted asylum to the Dalai Lama and a large number of Tibetans. So thousands of Tibetan refugees came to India and settled in Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh. This action of India was bitterly objected by China. China saw this act as an interference in the internal matters of China. In 1959, 10 policemen, while on patrolling duty, were killed in Aksai Chin. This is when India came to know that China had taken over Aksai Chin and had built a road from China to Tibet. This is when Indian government woke up and asked his army to patrol and control the borders with Tibet. When construction of road through the Aksai Chin was protested, Chow En Lai informed India that they do not recognize the McMahon Line. This line was forced upon them by the British. And then in 1962, China launched a surprise attack on Indian territory. Indians were not prepared for such an attack. This event gave a serious setback to Sino-India relations. It damaged the mutual relations to such an extent that they have not become normal so far. In 1967, Chinese dared again to attack Indian posts at Nathula in Sikkim border. But this time, India avenged 1962 properly. Indian soldiers inflicted huge casualties on them and drove them back. It was a great victory against China. That time, the Kingdom of Sikkim was a protectorate state of India. Sikkim had actually joined India as the 22nd state in 1975. This Indian annexation of Sikkim was also not recognized by China during that time. So this incident strained the relations further. But in 1976, India took initiatives to improve relations and thus diplomatic relations were restored. Thereafter, Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi visited China and held talks with Chinese leaders in 1988. This trip is said to be an ice-breaking trip which played a very important role in resuming and developing friendship between the two countries. They agreed to establish a joint working group which would work to resolve the border dispute. Since then, both the governments have also signed agreements on cultural exchanges and cooperation in science and technology. They have also opened four border posts for trade. Talks to resolve border disputes are continuing. In 1996, an agreement on confidence building measures along the LAC was signed. Military to military cooperation is increasing. Indian and Chinese leaders as well as officials are visiting each other's sites more frequently, holding talks on a variety of issues like trade, terrorism, river water, environmental degradation, etc. So, after 1967, the two countries did not go to war against each other for a long time. The border remained silent for about 50 years until Doklam happened in 1917, followed by Galwan Valley clashes in 2020. After Doklam incident, Indian Prime Minister had visited China in 2018, and you can see Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi speak as they walk along the East Lake in Wuhan on 28 April 2018. The meeting was aimed towards normalizing relations since Doklam. The Galwan Valley clash had resulted in the death of 20 Indian soldiers and an unspecified number of Chinese troops. After this incident, nationalist sentiments were very high in India. If you can remember, campaigns for boycotting Chinese products had started everywhere in India. Around that time, Indian government had banned some 200 Chinese apps also. I remember TikTok was one amongst them. But the trade between the two countries continued to boom despite border tensions following the military standoff in Galwan. India-China trade is growing at 30% per year since 1999. Bilateral trade between India and China have increased from 338 million US dollars in 1992 to more than 84 billion US dollars in 2017. Between 2008 and 2021, China has been India's largest trading partner. At this point, dear students, I think discussing relations with China without mention of Pakistan will be incomplete. See, China's closeness to Pakistan is also a matter of concern for India. In the light of present Indo-Pak relations, China giving military assistance to Pakistan is disturbing. China is the biggest arms supplier to Pakistan. About 47% of Chinese arms exports go to Pakistan. China assisted Pakistan in becoming a nuclear power. China and Pakistan had voiced their strong opposition after the state of Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated into two union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh in August 2019. India has repeatedly registered its protests over the CPEC project, China-Pakistan Economic Project, which passes through Pakistan illegally occupied territory of Kashmir. But China is going ahead with its project, disregarding India's protest and sovereignty concern. China used to block sanctions against Pakistan-based terrorist Masood Azhar for about a decade. So what I want to say is that if China distances itself from Pakistan in the interest of India, a new era of confidence may emerge between India and China. This is one. Then there are other activities that go against interests of India. For example, China opposes India's entry into the nuclear supply group NSG. China also does not support India's bid to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. China wants to isolate India in South Asia and limit her activities in South China Sea, Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea. By constructing paved road in Doklam, China's effort to move closer to the Siliguri corridor is again a grave security threat for India. All of these are also a matter of great concern to the Indian government. Boundary talks between India and China continue but without any tangible outcome. Also, it is difficult to understand how boundary talks on one side and Galwan and Doklam on the other sides are going together. China no more seems to be trustworthy, so trust has to be built first. Resolution of border dispute must be given high priority. There should be an open debate and discussion on the intentions of each other in the regions of South Asia, Indian Ocean, or the Pacific. This is how trust can be built, and then only we can move further to collaborate on other issues like global health or climatic change, etc. Let me stop here, students. I hope you have understood the lesson well. In the next class, we will read Japan as an emerging power. Till then, keep reading and have a nice time. Thank you.